Congratulate all of you, Pam and Alonzo and the Baltimore City Schools and all of what you're doing with the Baltimore Urban Debate League. Students, I am particularly honored because we're here to celebrate you and your ability to think and to speak. How many of you saw the movie The Great Debaters? Thought you would have, right? I want to talk about that for just a moment, and I'm only going to talk about 10, 12 minutes. But I'd like to begin with a moment of silence for my mentor and one of America's greatest thinkers ever, John Hope Franklin. John Hope Franklin was, to the second half of the 20th century, what Du Bois had been to the first half of the 20th century, what Booker T. Washington and before him Frederick Douglass had been in the mid-19th century through 1915. Du Bois was a graduate of Fisk and Harvard, the first black to get a PhD from Harvard. And he debated in the most eloquent ways as a voice for so many people. Du Bois was the first, and 30 years later, John Hope Franklin. And he was 93 years old, professor at Duke. And some would say his voice pricked the conscience of our country. His most recent book is particularly significant. It was entitled Mirror to America. Mirror to America. A moment of silence for John Hope Franklin. Thank you. I remember going to the, I don't go to the movies often, but I've been hearing about this movie, The Great Debaters, and I wanted to see what Denzel Washington and others had done, and he walks into the classroom, do you remember? And he said, I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen. And then they'll even say how beautiful I am. And they will be ashamed. I too am America. Langston Hughes wrote those words in the spirit of debate because he, like many others, wanted our country to understand that people of color took great pride in being Americans. And we wanted to be viewed as American citizens. And all the way back to Frederick Douglass, all the way through to Du Bois, all the way to Langston Hughes, the significance was that we needed to show the world as a country that we could embrace all people. Young people, as a child, I had the privilege of spending time with Dr. King. I had the privilege of leading a group of children to jail and of listening to Dr. King. And in many ways, he was debating. He was debating leadership in Birmingham, my hometown. He was saying what Booker T. Washington had said, what Douglass had said, children need a good education. He was presenting arguments. People were working to build the research, just as people had done when arguing like great Baltimorean Thurgood Marshall and others in 1954, saying we want children to have the opportunity to go to the best schools regardless of their race. They were all debating the significance of the American dream and trying to find ways to present arguments that would convince more and more people of how significant it was to see the dream fulfilled for all children. Well, tonight, we have the opportunity to celebrate young people who, as the film said, are learning to express themselves, to write, to read well, to think, to speak with confidence, and most important, to believe that they have something to say. What we're doing, Mr. Superintendent, is giving young people a chance to understand we appreciate the voice they have. We listen to that voice, and we want to help them to hone their skills so that they can become the future lawyers and superintendents and even the President of the United States. It is significant that the leader whom Obama talks a lot about, President Lincoln, was a great orator. And those of you who've studied history know that at that point, great form of entertainment for all of American public, speaking, debating, big deal. And the better one could speak, the more eloquently one could speak, the more revered that person was. And so Lincoln was like that. And then Frederick Douglass, called the Lion, was also a great orator. If you've not, students, read the new book, Giants, the book looks at the parallelism between Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. In your history classes, you may have remembered the dates with Stephen Douglas and Lincoln, but this is looking at both men in the mid-19th century, and even the fact that Douglas went to the White House 3 times. It's amazing. Douglas went to debate in Washington, getting equal pay for colored soldiers in the Civil War. And he was so convincing that by the time he left the office of the Secretary of War, the Secretary had offered him a commission as the first commissioned colored officer. And unfortunately, later on, the Secretary realized he had been so dazzled that he really couldn't afford to do that. So he never did make him that commissioned officer. But he was so impressed with this man's ability to argue the points, you see, that on the spot he did that. Why do I bring that up? You are preparing for leadership. Any of you in the room, all of you students who are becoming these great speakers and people who can argue the points. And I want you to understand the derivation of this process of debate. It goes back a long time. I actually had one of my classicists to help me understand this distinction between arguing and debating and the actual derivation. And it's interesting looking at the Latin prefixes of the word debate and of arguing. And what we find is that in earlier times, debate was actually seen more as an impolite term used, and it really meant to beat people down. It's very interesting. The word "d," a prefix which means down from, and the word "batuo," meaning beat. But interestingly, in contrast, the word "argue" comes from the Latin "arguo," which means to show, reveal, and make clear. And the idea was that one could actually find ways of making clearer the truth. Well, as time has gone on, debate has moved from that impolite approach, in most cases anyway, to being a time when we get a chance to exchange ideas, to present your arguments, to conduct the research. And the one who's most coherent, most convincing through argument makes all the difference in the world. One of the things said one of the points made in this video that I really liked had to do with emotions, that what debate allows us to do is to hone our skills in listening well, in thinking critically, and most important, in understanding that you can do much more if you can control your emotions. You know, there's a saying from Greek mythology, those the gods wish to destroy, they first make angry. If I make you angry, I can make you do anything. It's a very interesting point. And so being able to keep one's emotions down, to focus on the analysis of it, to think through as clearly as possible the points you want to make. These will be skills that will serve you throughout your lives. Believe me, the superintendent and I often work hard to keep our emotions down and to think about how we can best do things. And so the point I want to make to you today is that as you look at leaders, Mary McLeod Bethune, wonderful woman, one of the great women educators of the 20th century, who said that amazingly, she had started this school for girls, little girls of color in Florida, and the donor came to the school, and he was seeing this poor, pitiful place and this crate boxes they were using as desk, and he said, where's this school you want me to be a trustee of? And she looked at him, and she had presented all of our arguments, and when she finished, she looked him in his eyes, and she said, in my mind, in my soul. And he was just dazzled by her confidence. And the fact that even though they didn't have the material things, they had this spirit that said, we're going to build this school for these kids. She had the arguments and the confidence, and she didn't allow herself to feel insulted. She just built the arguments. But that's what you want to do. One of my heroes, finally, was Booker T. Washington. And there's a new book out on his interpretation, found at Tuskegee. He went around the country, literally, arguing for, debating the notion that all children should have the right to a strong education. All children. And amazingly, he was the first person of color to sit at the dinner table in the White House in 1901. And people were appalled that Teddy Roosevelt would do it. But what happened was that for years after that, he found himself arguing the point. That was in 1901. And I want you to think about this Americans, look how far we've come. From the country being appalled that someone of color could sit at the table to the person being the head of the table, looking the same way. Amazing the progress is made. What made the difference? Education. Education of that person who's now our president, but education of Americans. Education of people to listen to the arguments about why children should have the opportunity to get a good education. Education about the need for all of us to have certain opportunities. The fact that we're all human beings. The fact that we're all Americans. Education that said, if we really believe in fairness, then we will judge people by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. And so I leave you with this thought, students. You must see yourselves in the future today. You must think about your capacity to read, to write, to speak, to think, to research, to work hard, to have confidence in yourselves. I'll never forget seeing my first black mathematician, and I said, I want to be like him. I want to be like him. And they said he had something called a PhD. And I said, what's a PhD? And they said, that's the highest degree you can get. I said, I'm going to get a PhD. And every day, beginning at age 13, I said to myself in the mirror, good morning, Dr. Hrabowski. I was this fat little kid doing math problems, but I saw it. And you know what I would do when the teacher would be at the board and she would be presenting the material and I'd see kids who were bored? I'd be figuring out how could I say that in a way to excite people? Because that's what debate allows you to do, right? You get engaged, you get involved in it, you get a chance to talk. So I'd be working on questions I could ask kids, and I'd start tutoring them, working to figure out how do you get kids excited about math. But that's what you're doing, and getting kids excited about debate the same way. But I saw myself teaching the math, becoming Dr. Hrabowski. See yourselves being the lawyers, being the superintendent, being the amazing president of the United States. You can do this. See it. And focus on analyzing the same way you do the arguments in a debate, analyzing what you must do to get to the next step. I believe in you, and you must believe in yourselves. I, too, seeing America, I can now sit at the table. All I have to do is work hard and be the best. Thank you all very much.